saving the car companies. And the idea is let's get people to buy cars again and drive cars again because we will save the American economy if we do it. So my question is, how do we now take this campaign to the people who, through democracy, control the power? The G20, Japan, those are democratic countries, and their leaders, to the degree they don't buy into Copenhagen, will do it because they find it politically unsaleable to their own people. So either we have to find a way to get citizens to buy into it and give up their cars, give up their meat, or I think you can't ask political leaders or experts to solve problems in a democratic regime where the people themselves are unwilling to do what is necessary.
Thank you, Benjamin Barber. Is it, in a way, Copenhagen irrelevant? Do we all have to just get on and change?
No, it's very relevant. It's not only about political leadership, but it's also about our personal attitudes. I used to think up until this morning that the largest challenge we had was decoupling growth from carbon emissions. I walk into a working session and I hear Sean Cleary say that besides that, we also have to decouple personal satisfaction from personal consumption. Now think about that. Decouple personal satisfaction from personal consumption. Okay, so I have a tie, and I have 18 more back home. I can only wear one per day. But my personal satisfaction, because of the values we have, is that I need to have 18, and if I can buy number 19 this afternoon in the duty-free, so much the better. Michal, how many pairs of shoes do you have back home? Be honest.
Yes.
How many pairs of shoes do you have?
And
Let's
you know
have
what?
a conversation.
They're all
How many
black
pairs
and
of
they're all
shoes?
flat, so
Don't-
why
it
do I
doesn't
need
matter.
so many?
How many do you have? How many?
Given up counting.
Given up counting. Excellent. So that is what we have to change. That is what we have to change. Because the truth of the matter is that 1 billion of us in the world, of which we all belong to, overconsume. And if the World Bank was here, Bob Zoellick would probably declare success this afternoon as if the other 6 billion could come to consume the way we do. Wrong. The world doesn't have enough to go around. You mentioned vehicles. By the year 2015, China will be the first market for vehicles. At that point in time, China will have 140 vehicles per 1,000 Chinese versus 620 vehicles in the European space per 1,000 Europeans and 920 vehicles in the US per 1,000 Americans. So if that is a model to follow, you know, I'm reminded of what Gandhi was asked back in 47. He said, Mr. Gandhi, now India's independent. Do you aspire that Indians will have the same livelihood as they did to have in the UK? And he thought about it and he said, it's taken the UK half the resources of a planet to be where they are. How many planets would we need for India? Exactly to what Kumi mentioned. So this is not about only political leadership. This is not about you helping us get the message out there. This is not only about a multi-stakeholder platform. It's about our personal attitudes. Everybody here is an agent of change. Otherwise, you would have not been invited. What are you going to go home and do after today?
Well, you struck a chord there,
Yes.
Jose Maria. Kumi, you're an agent of change too.
So, Jose Maria, after that wonderful eloquence, I think I'll get Greenpeace to recruit you as its next staff member. Because that's a kind of...
Actually, I volunteered, but they didn't want to take me.
Okay. The second
It's
thing I want to
turning
say...
into a love-in. We've got to stop this,
So the
I
second
think.
thing is, I was wanting to say that if you want to give me 3 of your best ties, I'll happily take them. So, thank you. But I think the Gandhi quotation is really helpful because the most powerful Gandhi quotation flowing out of that one that's very relevant for the point that Jose Maria made so eloquently is simply this. This planet has enough to meet all of humanity's need, but not all of humanity's greed. And that's really what we have to begin to be asking. Because I come from South Africa, right? Let me just tell you, in my country, the gap between the rich and poor is growing at such an astronomical rate. It's unsustainable. And let's look at the quality of life for the rich people. Their walls are having to go higher and higher. Their gates are having to get stronger and stronger. And their mental happiness, as Sean, my fellow South African, can tell you there, is actually going down. So we have to begin to think. And it really, what the young people were saying, they got it right. They kept saying we have to imagine and vision a different way. We have to be willing to change. And you know, the other thing Mahatma Gandhi always said was, be the change you want to be. And there's a young woman here from the UK who asked a question about health. And, you know, she made a point of saying, I'm coming to this thing on climate change in Geneva from Leeds. I'm not going to come by plane. She took a train to Paris and rode 3 days from Paris to get here. Now, I'm not saying that Jose needs to come with a bicycle from Timor-Leste to a meeting like this. But I do think that we also have to begin, even in the NGO sector, if I can be quite bold, to question our own ways of operating, whether we're using resources more effectively and so on. And I do think that if we can model the kind of changes that we want our leaders to actually promote at negotiations such as Copenhagen in our own practice, that in itself begins to be part of the advocacy that is needed at this point in time.
Thank you. It starts with every single person in this room. I think we have a questioner down here. I'm just going to hand you the mic.
Hi there. I'm MJ Mace. I guess I'm one of those rare birds, a female climate negotiator. There are quite a few, actually. There's an excellent one from Costa Rica. I think you may know her.
My sister.
Yeah, exactly. She's fantastic. We've had quite a few discussions about Copenhagen, about numbers. And one of the things that's interesting to me is that we hear 20, we hear 30, we hear 40. Small island states have said what we see is needed is at least 45% by 2020. Interestingly, that's a number that hasn't been picked up by the media. It's a number that's not only been supported by small island states, but by Costa Rica and quite a number of other countries. The reason I flag that is not for the number itself, but to flip it and say we've also heard discussions on numbers from developing countries. And I wonder if you think that there's value in trying to put a number on what we might be able to expect from developing countries, of course supported and enabled by technology transfer and finance. But you know, we talk about it in the context of development assistance, but would it be useful to try to have an aspirational goal for what could come from developing countries as part of the global solidarity that we need from this package? Thank you.
Yes, I do think there's value talking about numbers because, amongst other things, we need to be held accountable as we move forward, and numbers are an easy way to be held accountable. Personally, I am more in the camp of those scientists like Jim Hansen that most recently have come out and said, guess what? We shouldn't be at 450 as an aspirational roof on emissions, 450 ppm, parts per million. We should be bringing that down to 350 parts per million. Now, I understand that 450, 350, 500, all of these numbers are kind of hocus pocus to most of us. One way of looking at that debate and at the numbers is assessing risk. Because math, porque las matemáticas no mienten. How do I say that in English? Because math does not, thank you, because math does not lie. Today we're at 385 parts per million. We're accumulating 2.5 parts per million per year. 90 years to the end of the century times 2.5 is 225 plus 385 is 610. Way over what scientists say is permissible if we want to have less than 2 degree centigrade temperature changes. So scientists also say that anything over 450 parts per million gives us a 50% chance of having plus minus 5 degrees centigrade changes. Think about that. 50% chance of having plus or minus 5 degrees centigrade changes. The last time we had plus 5 degrees centigrades, crocodiles were swimming in the North Pole